What's up guys, today we're going to be going over what I'm bringing into the raid tomorrow for the day 1 contest clear. And in this video I'll be going over the few weapon loadouts I'll be using, the mods I'll be using, and then finally one build for each character. Let's jump right into it with what weapons and what loadouts I'll be using. So going into the raid, I believe I'll be starting with the ignition code for blinding, along with the funnel web and the parasite. And the reason I'm using these weapons is usually because the first few encounters aren't really heavy boss fights and they're more like an entrance to the raid. And this entire build is more about ad clear, and the parasite is really good for hitting high health single targets, for example champions, Lucent Brood, mini bosses, or even big groups of enemies. This will just absolutely destroy all of those things I just mentioned. Then between funnel web and the rest of my mods, I have really good ad clear. Then I have blinding plus slide shot on my ignition code just to blind everything like crazy. I think I'm going to be running this loadout until it stops working, which will more likely be the first boss fight. And at that point I will put on a legendary rocket launcher. The one I have is the Palmera with explosive light and impact casing, and it also has built-in tracking, which will make it pretty easy to land all my shots. And now since I have a legendary power weapon on, I'm going to go ahead and swap over to the Osseo. And I think it's going to be really important to use exotic primary most of the time throughout the raid, and that is because of the 40% buff to red bar enemies. And while you're under light, that's going to be doing a lot of damage and make it feel like you're pretty much playing on light. And that's why I think using exotic primary is going to be very important. And now that I have that on, I'm going to use the True Teller in my energy slot for my blinding GL. And I can see myself using this loadout for a majority of the raid once the first build stops working, because the first build is more about painting kills with my primary, and also when you're under light, that will just stop working at some point. And if we ever need more boss damage, I'll probably first try to swap to Is Not Used Burden and throw on something like a scout rifle to get a little bit more damage in. And that still isn't enough, I will then go ahead and swap over to the Whisper of the Worm, or maybe even try Sleeper. But I think most of the raid I'm going to try to stick to the legendary rocket, because one of our teammates is going to be using G-Horn and giving us all the Wolfpack rounds. And I think that is it for what weapons I'm taking into the raid and what I plan on using. So now moving on to the mods and the builds. I think the first major question I'm going to get the most in this video is Protective Light. It got nerfed down to only being a 10% increase to your armor resistance, whatever you want to call it, when you become red bar health, which I don't think is worth using at all, because you need this plus a way to become charged with light, and that 10% increase will only proc once you're red bar health. And I don't think that 10% will ever make or break you staying alive. I think you staying alive once you become red bar health will be determined by getting to cover, getting a healing aid thrown at you, going into the healing rift, proccing devour, something like that, and more than likely won't have anything to do with having protective light on. So I don't believe it's worth taking up 2 of your slots. So what should you be using instead? Well, like I said, when I load up into the raid, I'm going to be playing my super aggressive ad clear build, and the 5 mods I'm using for that, the first one will be Bountiful Wells, then we have Phantom Might, then we have Elemental Ordnance, Elemental Armaments, and finally Volatile Flow, along with Overload Grenades to stun Overload Champions. And those are my 5 mods I'll use for my Verity's Brow ad clear build. And like I said, I'm going to be using that until it stops working, and I'll be creating all kinds of void elemental wells for my teammates, which they'll be picking up, and we'll all be spamming abilities. And that will work really well for the first few opening encounters until we get to a boss fight. But what will I do once we get up to a major boss fight? At that point, I would first swap over to the secondary weapon loadout I was mentioned before. And now ignore the drip, I was messing with a bunch of armor. I'm going to swap over to Necrotic Grip as my Warlock Exotic. And with the mods, I'm going to be using Reaping Wellmaker to make void elemental wells whenever I put down my rift. My next weapon final blow, doesn't matter which one it is, will create a void elemental well. I have Well of Utility, so when I pick that void well up, I'll get a chunk of my rift back. Then the next mod will be Elemental Time Dilation, which will make multiple elemental well mods that have time buffs will stack. And with that, I have double Well of Tenacity, and what that will do is, if we go into the game, it'll make it so that whenever I pick up a void elemental well, which I get from getting a kill with any of my weapons after putting down my class ability, I will then get the resist for 12 seconds, which is quite a lot of time. And more than likely by the time that is up, you'll pick up another one between you and all your teammates making void elemental wells, and that will be a 50% increase to your armor, damage resistance, whatever you want to call it. which is the old protective light number but at all times. And as long as you have multiple people making void elemental wells, you should be able to chain that quite often throughout the raid. And that's gonna be my mod setup for all 3 characters. So the rest of the video, whenever I'm explaining my subclass or whatever on the other 2 characters, those will be my 5 mods I'll be running. And once I make that swap, my subclass will look like this. I have Healing Rift with Vortex Grenade. I have Child of the Old Gods to make my Rift have the Void Soul, which will debuff all the enemies and drain them and give me both grenade and melee energy back because I'll have Healing Rift on. Now I also have Feed the Void to proc Devour. Now I have the Blue Fragment, the one that'll make my Vortex last longer. Echo of Undermining, which is the Void debuff. Then Echo of Persistence to make my Devour last a little bit longer. In the case I do proc it, I'll be able to chain it a little bit easier. So if you just look in the game of how this all works, pretty much I just want to be putting in my Rift whenever I have it to give myself and all my teammates nearby the Healing Rift, which will then proc both the Reaping Wellmaker along with the Void Soul. So the first enemy I kill will send the Void Soul to suck them all and debuff them and give me both grenade and melee energy back. And that first kill will drop the Void Elemental Well. Picking that up will give me the resistance for 12 seconds. And all in all, I should have pretty good uptime on my grenades to proc Devour. And I also have the Osteo plus Necrotic Grip, which will be extremely good for clearing out low tier enemies while 20 light under the raid. So I think that will be my main setup once we get into some real encounters in the raid outside of like the opening few. And starting off, I will be on Nova Warp, but once we get to a boss fight, I'll probably swap over to the Cataclysm for the tracking and the boss damage. But as you see with all my mods, none of them are really based around Void at all, so I'm free to swap over to Well and Middle Tree for the Benevolent Dawn and getting my Rift back extremely fast, which will help even more with the Reaping Wellmaker and all that stuff going on anyways. So depending on what we need, I'll bring in another Well, or if not, I'll bring in a Nova Bomb or Woodwalker in general. Now for both Titan and Hunter, I'm not taking these into the raid, so if you have your own build that you think will work extremely well, definitely use it, because I've not really thought too much about this. But what I would do for Titan is more or less just try to spam this as often as possible, the Bastion Void aspect, where when you cast your barricade, you'll give overshields to yourself and all of your allies. Then from there, I would just go for suppression, so suppression grenade. And due to this aspect right here, while you have your overshield, you'll get your grenade back extremely fast. From there, my fragments would be final blows while trying to get you your super energy to help get bubbles as fast as possible. Then the bloom fragment, along with the one which will increase the duration of your overshield. And I think the only new important mod that I didn't show off on Warlock to be using is this one right here, Energy Vaporism. Whenever you suppress a target, you'll get energy for your release charge ability. So that should help you spam both your barricade and your grenades. Then the rest of the mods will be the same. I have not changed them because I don't plan on playing this character in the raid, so no point changing them. But the same 5 mods I showed off on Warlock. Then on Hunter, using the Quiver along with the Orpheus Rigs will be really good for burst boss damage and applying the 30% debuff for your entire team. So that's gonna be like a must use. Then from there, you just want to have a really good invisibility build to survive and res teammates. So what I would be using is first off Gamer's Dodge to get snare bombs extremely fast, which you can then throw to weaken enemies. And once those weakened enemies die, because of the Silas Executioner aspect, you'll become invisible, which is one of 2 ways to become invis. The other one will be just dodging. And once you dodge, you'll proc the Reaping Wellmaker mod and create Void Elemental Wells. Then I have on Vortex Grenades along with the Fragment to make them last longer. And those will debuff / weaken the targets, which once again will make me go invis. I also have the Fragment which will increase the duration of invisibility, along with the one which will make them explode. So the whole point of this is to dodge as often as possible, go invis, and create the Void Elemental Wells. Then you should have really good uptime on your Snare Bomb, which will weaken enemies, which will also make you go invis, along with your grenade. Whenever you kill things that you grenade, you will also go invis. So overall, all kinds of ways to go invis while spamming your Snare Bomb and your grenades. And yeah, I think that's gonna be it for the video. I think the 5 mods are by far the best 5 mods to be using on all 3 characters to both create Void Elemental Wells and get as much uptime on Will of Tenacity, which will be the best way to survive in the raid. Or stuff you can be throwing on or resist mods on your chest piece. Then obviously making sure you have the right ammo finders, scavengers, and all that good stuff. And yeah, let me know if you're gonna be taking one of these builds into the raid tomorrow, or if you got someone else you're using, let me know what that is. Like usual, thanks for watching. Catch you guys next time.